Welcome to Windows on the World, bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories. On tonight's show. Well, this week I wanted to talk about the power of affidavits because we've covered this quite a bit on recent shows. I mean, if you look at last week's show about council tax, and we've had council tax pantomime courts, you can find that there's a lot of information on the site about all this, but I wanted to refer to an affidavit that I've done, and just to give people some idea of what you can do with these documents, because they're extremely important in law. An unrebutted affidavit stands as the only truth. An affidavit has to be rebutted. It's very, very powerful, and truth is expressed in the form of an affidavit. It has to be the truth. It's your solemn expression of your truth. And in commerce, an affidavit must be accompanied and must underlay and form the foundation for any commercial transaction whatsoever. That's very important. So whenever anyone wants to get you into court for a financial transaction, there has to be a sworn statement, an affidavit put in there. Now, we know that these people, these corporations don't do this, but it's the basic underpinning of law, and it's very important. Also, remember the legal maxim, equity will not allow a statute to be used as a cloak for fraud. Now, as just as a preamble for this, I will give you some examples of this with so-called bailiff companies and civil enforcement officers. Now, bailiffs have to be actually bonded by the court, and they have huge liabilities if things go wrong with their bond. You can go after their bond in court, as many people know, but this new Control of Goods Act seems to be their excuse now for completely steamrolling over things, and it's quite amusing. You can actually use it to your own advantage. If you look at the Control of Goods Act, you can find that as it's a government statute where they basically changed the bailiff laws. I'm not going to go into that right now because it's not that important to what we're talking about. But recently we had a case where a V5 document had been changed, and a bailiff company called White and Company clamped the car, and they stated that the person who had changed the V5 document had done it to avoid the ticket. That's totally irrelevant. The document stated that it belonged to somebody else, and that's all that matters in commerce. The V5 is that form, and they can't go around and say, well, we thought it belonged to somebody else. Well, I could do that. I could break into your house and say I thought it was mine, and steal all the contents of your house. Wouldn't really stand up in court, would it, that one? But there was a particular occasion where this guy's come round to the house after the car had been released, and he's put documentation through the door, Control of Goods Act, etc. This is after we've had the car legally unclamped, so they're still trying to get their pound of flesh, right? So second time he's come round under the Control of Goods Act, he's put a document into the letterbox saying notice of intention to re-enter premises. Ooh, nasty, that one. What they're saying there is that they've already been into the premises and gained peaceful entry. Now, when a bailiff or civil enforcement officer comes into your house peacefully, i.e. through an open door, and they've contracted with you and you've put in an agreement with them, if you don't keep up that agreement, they can break the door down. That's what he's implying. Now, this criminal has never even knocked on the door. He's just put something in the letterbox. which was outside because the letterbox was not actually by the part of the front door. Okay, so he's saying that an agreement was in place, it had been broken, and he was now going to re-enter the premises. That means he can break in. So this guy's a complete criminal. It's called Roy Stanton Warmby, R-O-I Stanton Warmby, W-H-A-R-M-B-Y, W-H-A-R-M-B-Y. He's a certificated bailiff, and he's just committed a massive fraud, which should actually get him struck off, and his bond should be taken by the court, and he should be sacked by White & Co., who he works for. But that's just basically how these people are operating now. They're way above the law, or they think they are. This is really Cameron's big society, what we've been talking about. Petty public officials and idiots, thugs basically, thinking that they can steamroll over the law. Well, the golden rule of law states that everybody is equal under the law and nobody is above it. So let's make these people personally liable for their actions and go after them commercially, which brings us into affidavits. Affidavits are incredibly important, and I just wanted to go over something because I've had obviously quite a lot of run-ins with local authorities, particularly Waltham Forest Council, who have committed many acts of fraud. I've actually called them out in court as fraudsters. The judge didn't bat an eyelid. Quite amusing, really. Judges do not like the F word. They tend to look down because it's criminal, but they do acknowledge it. I won't go into that particular case, but you can find it on landofthefree.co.uk. I had a very interesting case with Waltham Forest Council about the single person's discount validation form, which you do not have to fill in because it comes from a third-party data mining company, and it professes to be a council document, which it is not. It creates fraud. So that's interesting. Just as a side issue here, any form from the police, the council, or any other organisation, forms that are sent out to you, you do not have to fill those forms in if you supply the evidence yourself. You can supply your own paperwork. You do not have to fill in these forms, and that includes anything from the police, which are these police forms that come from obviously civilian centres. I'm not talking here about things that come through the letterbox which are from the court, which may be for criminal matters. So don't mix those two up. I'm talking about civil matters here, just fines, administrative stuff. The police send out these forms from these centres, and if you supply the evidence on your own paperwork, then you do not have to fill theirs in. Same as with the council, same as with any of these organisations who are demanding information from you. So let's go into this affidavit. It's quite amusing because this really shows how despicable and tyrannical these local authorities have become, because they're acting way above the law, and there's always a new change agent in there, isn't there? Head of Revenues and Benefits, and that keeps changing. They keep putting in all these different people. It changes about every 6 to 8 months. And these new faces appear. Well, they're not faces really, are they? Because you never see them, and they never respond to you when you write to them. But this is particularly funny because I put a lot of this into an affidavit, because now the council were threatening to put me in prison, or this particular woman was threatening to kidnap me. So here's what the affidavit can do. It's your highest form of truth. It has to be the truth, and it has to be clear and concise, and unless it's rebutted point for point, it stands as the only truth in the matter. Now, we know that many organisations such as the CSA, the Child Support Agency, have produced fake affidavits. In other words, somebody's sworn testimony to get you into court, and they've done it under a false name. We found out this was happening years ago. That's the highest form of perjury. Those people should be locked up, because they're not. They're on really high salaries, harassing and stealing from the public under Cameron's big society. So here we go with this affidavit. you have to swear the following points. Now, it's like agents of Waltham Forest Council, including Wendy Gibbs, Charmaine McLawrence and Nalda Russell Stowe, have repeatedly ignored the previously presented facts now represented in this affidavit. So when you write to these people, they don't respond, or they fail to respond to the points that you bring up. Now put that in your affidavit, everything they've failed to respond to. They were claiming an amount of £470, this goes back to 2009 I think, claimed to be owed for council tax property in London. And it had no standing, and this is why the amount was never accounted for or validated, and no court liability order existed for the amount, which it doesn't. You get the notice of liability order, but when you ask for the document, it goes really quiet, or they say somebody else has got it. Now it says, although requested on the public record, no liability order could be produced by Waltham Forest Council. This was at Thames Magistrates Court, and they later heard my counterclaim in 2013. When their agents Wendy Gibbs, who's head of revenues and benefits at the time, and Waltham Forest barrister Geeta Chakrabarti were present, and my claim was upheld. This was to do with a single person's discount validation form. You can find that at landofthefree.co.uk. Very important information on that, which ties into what I was talking about at the beginning, about the filling in of these forms, these third-party forms, which this particular one was actually stated to be from the council, although it wasn't. It's from a data mining company. So the thing is with this, no liability order could be produced at all upon request, and Waltham Forest instructed their agents, Newlyn bailiffs, thereby creating a fraud. So Waltham Forest claimed their enforcement agents, Newlyn, were in possession of an order, and Newlyn bailiffs stated that they were in possession of such an order, but when demanded in writing, the document could not be produced. You can see that they're on landofthefree.co.uk. Council and Newlyn, it's actually Newlyn and council fraud exposed. It's really hilarious because they're just dropping the hot potato and throwing it at each other. It's pathetic. But now, although Newlyn bailiffs had previously falsely stated in writing they were in possession of such an order, Amanda Lamb, acting as officer for Newlyn bailiffs, stated that Waltham Forest were in possession of the order. Neither party could produce the order, and Newlyn bailiffs referred the matter back to the council. And Newlyn bailiffs don't come near me anymore. They tried a few times, and once you hit them with this, they don't know where to go. They've never even rebutted my claim of fraud against them, which is in the public domain and has been for several years. And it also comes up when you Google them. It comes up on second or third page. Newlyn and council fraud exposed. Absolutely hilarious. Following my most previous correspondence to them, which stated all known facts, this Charmaine McLawrence, who was acting for Revenues and Benefits Officer, that's her title, she's a Revenues and Benefits Officer, thereby having public liability, which she would not even know about. Because not when they come out with this stuff, it's so arrogant and they ignore everything you say. As officers, they should be in huge amounts of trouble for that, but of course they're not, because it's the big society. We're wrong, they're right. It's called consensus. We have to agree. So Nalda Russell Stowe, head of Revenues and Benefits for Waltham Forest Council, she then communicated a threat in writing signed by herself, stating that I would be imprisoned if she claimed this amount, this £470 from 5 years ago, which they couldn't produce any evidence of, was not paid within 14 days. This Nalda Russell Stowe, she stated that an administrative court would apply for a warrant of arrest and I would be forcibly kidnapped by her agents and brought to a court. Of course they can't do this, it's absolute nonsense. And they can do it if you let them, but we've already been into that. We won't go into that at the moment. But basically she's made a huge claim there, and when it actually comes down to it, they just keep sending out their stupid bits of paper, which are all wrong. So once you realise that these threats are as empty as the people making them, then it all becomes a bit of fun. So Nalda Russell Stowe, she's with willful intent, this woman, at all times ignored all facts presented by myself. And it's all on my court of record. I've given them all the information. I've even given them the links to my articles which refute everything they say, which accuse them of fraud, and they actually stated, I think it's this Charmaine McLawrence, I won't be looking at the links, I'm sure they did though. It says, any complaint and subsequent claim made by Nalda Russell Stowe to a court will be met with counterclaim against itself under her full public liability as an agent for Waltham Forest Council, which is what you should say to them. They don't like that. They go and hide back under a stone for a while. A further amount of £120, which is alleged to be for the costs of a summons, is invalid for the following reasons. Now, we've covered this on our show with the Reverend Paul Nicholson. There is a judicial review into council tax pantomime court costs. We've covered this a few times, and they are obliged to give you a breakdown of the so-called costs. We know that they just print these summons and they print these notice of liability orders, but if they print a summons to a court, they actually have to give a breakdown of what the costs are. That's called equity. It's chancery, you know. You can't, when it goes into a court, you can't just make up a fee. You have to show where it's been paid out in order to claim. So if you've got a claim against somebody, you can't say, well, he owes me £100. What for? Well, I don't know, really, just owes me £100. When was it from? Can't remember. So what was it for? Well, I don't know. That's what the council do. So the amount was paid in full, and the council are fully aware that the amount had been paid in full, right? It's been paid in full by their own admission, and yet they still embarked on an administrative process, issuing their own summons whilst in possession of the known facts, thereby creating a fraud. Now, when you say all this in court, it's absolutely hilarious, because you can accuse the council of fraud all day long if they are guilty of it, and they have been in the cases where I've been there, and the judge will actually just look down, make a little note and not refer to it again, because judges do not like the F word. It's criminal. So they prefer to go, okay, incompetence. Charmaine McLawrence, on behalf of Waltham Forest Council, ignored all facts presented in the written statement that had given to her all the facts, every single one. That's despicable. She's an agent of the council and an officer. Officer is an ecclesiastical position traditionally, so that means she's in high office. She has a duty as somebody who's representing a corporation which is actually working for the community. She doesn't realise her corporate liabilities here, and of course these people don't. That's why they're there, because they are despicable change agents who've been trained to war against the public, basically. Ignore everything. Everything's by consensus. You all have to agree. So Charmaine McLawrence failed to respond to the request for breakdown of costs, as is her statutory duty as a revenues officer. Charmaine McLawrence has knowingly acted against the wishes of HM Courts as per her statutory duty as an agent and revenues officer, as stated, this is important, in the government guidelines for local authorities issued by the Department for Communities and Local Government of June 2013. You can use this when they hit you with their costs for their fake court cases, when they do their bulk hearings. Local authorities are reminded that they are only permitted to charge reasonable costs for the court summons and liability order. Well, £120 is reasonable if you print it yourself, isn't it? I don't think so. In the interests of transparency, local authorities should be able to provide a breakdown on request showing how these costs are calculated. So she's failed in her duty as an officer, as a public servant, and in her official capacity. Now, really, that woman, Charmaine McLawrence, should be sacked, but of course she won't. She'll just go to a different department. They all keep changing their job titles, and they're getting paid a lot of money, which is really something the public should be much more concerned about. Go for these people. Go for them. Make them publicly liable for their despicable actions. Now, all the named parties in this affidavit, they're all fully liable for their actions of an attempted to cause undue loss here, and whilst being in possession of the only known facts, which they have at all times ignored in breach of their statutory duty. Now, despite being supplied evidence that I am no longer an occupant of the above-named property and the land registry change of title deed available, agents of Waltham Forest Council, they basically stated that they're going to keep sending bills until I can say who's moved in to a place that I've moved out of. Well, it's their job to find out who's moved in. It's not my job to tell them. They're the actual organisation who's looking for the liability for the property is no longer mine if I'm not in possession of that property or an occupant. So they actually stated that on the phone. Because it was a property company that had bought the place, I couldn't say who actually was the new person, the new legal entity moving in. And this idiot on the other phone said, well, you're still liable. I mean, where do they get these people from? They're obviously all change agents, and it's absolutely despicable that local authorities have stooped to this level, which obviously they have. Now, all facts presented in the affidavit must be rebutted point by point and by all named in the document. This is all very important stuff. Truth is expressed in the form of an affidavit. It's your solemn expression of your truth. In commerce, an affidavit must be accompanied and must underlay and form the foundation for any commercial transaction whatsoever. Very important stuff, this. An unreported affidavit stands as truth in commerce. An unrebutted affidavit becomes the judgment in commerce. Equity will not allow a statute to be used as a cloak for fraud, and these people are using equity as a cloak for fraud. That's a criminal offence. Make them liable, have some fun doing it, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World, and we'll see you soon.